Your place is in the trash." She screamed, and before I could even process what was happening, my own daughter shoved me out of the house. I stood there, stunned, the cold wind biting through my clothes, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would shatter. How had it come to this? The person I raised, the person I gave everything to, had turned against me in an instant. I wanted to scream, to beg, to make her see, but something inside me snapped. And in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I am Thomas, 53 years old, and I never imagined that the person I loved most in this world would one day stand in front of me with contempt in her eyes. My daughter, Emily, 19, the little girl I held in my arms when she took her first steps, now looked at me like I was nothing more than a stranger. Our house, the place that once smelled of home-cooked meals and warm laughter, now felt cold, alien, and threatening. I had spent decades working hard, giving everything I could to provide her with a life I never had. I had believed that love and sacrifice would be returned with gratitude, respect, and loyalty. I was wrong. It started subtly, the small signs that something had changed. Emily's words, once gentle and kind, had grown sharp. Her tone, once full of warmth, now carried a bitter edge I could not place. I noticed the way she avoided my gaze, the way she flinched when I entered the room, the way she whispered to her friends in the living room with hushed laughter that stopped the moment I appeared. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself it was just a phase, that teenagers rebel, that she was finding herself. But deep down, I felt a gnawing fear, a sense that the foundation of our relationship was crumbling. That fear became reality on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I had just returned from work, soaked through, tired, yet hopeful that we could share some time together. Emily was sitting on the couch, her posture rigid, her face a mask of disdain. I greeted her as I always did, softly, carefully, hoping to bridge the growing gap between us. But her reply cut deeper than any knife. "Your place is in the trash," she spat. And before I could even react, she shoved me out of the house. Rain drenched my clothes, seeping into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the icy shock that gripped my heart. I stood on the porch, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed in my ears. My mind raced, my body trembled, and 1,000 questions swirled. How could she say such things? How could she turn against me, the man who had given her everything? What had I done to deserve this? The neighbors stared, some in confusion, some in silent judgment, but no one stepped in. I realized then that this humiliation was mine to endure alone. I wandered the street, the wet pavement reflecting the dim light of the setting sun, each step heavy with disbelief. Memories flashed through my mind, the nights I stayed awake, worrying about her, the sacrifices I made to ensure she never lacked, the celebrations, the tears, the laughter, and now all of it seemed meaningless. Emily had not always been like this. I remembered her as a child, running through the garden with her small hands stretched toward the sky, her laughter ringing like a bell in the house. I remembered baking cookies together, staying up late to read her favorite stories, comforting her after nightmares, holding her hand through every heartbreak and disappointment. And yet all of those moments seemed erased by a single cruel sentence. I was not just hurt, I was invisible, discarded, betrayed in a way that felt unimaginable. But even in that moment of pain, I felt something stirring within me. A quiet, simmering anger, a sense that I would not allow this to define me. I refused to accept that my life's work, my love, my very existence could be dismissed so easily. I would find a way to respond, a way to reclaim what she had tried to take from Manat with violence. But with justice, with cunning, with a satisfaction that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind that I would not be humiliated without consequence. That night, I returned to my small apartment across town, cold, wet, and furious, but determined. I sat in the dim light, staring at the rain-streaked window, feeling every emotion at once: betrayal, heartbreak, disbelief, and a growing resolve. I was a man who had been cast aside, but I was not defeated, not yet. I had to think, plan, and wait for the perfect moment. Emily had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I would make sure she understood that no betrayal goes unpunished. If you have ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, if you have ever given your all and still been cast aside, then you know the pain I felt that day. But this story is not just about heartbreak. It is about rising from that betrayal, about taking control when the world tries to humiliate you. Hit that like button now, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because you are about to witness a story of justice, of revenge, and of proving that no one can break you without consequences. Stay with me. The moment of reckoning is coming. After that day, nothing was the same. Emily's actions became increasingly cruel, calculated in ways that pierced me deeper than any words could. She would call me at odd hours, her voice dripping with sarcasm and disdain. Sometimes she did not even speak, just laughed at me, a sharp, bitter sound that seemed designed to wound. Every attempt I made to reach out, to reason, to remind her of the bond we once shared, was met with mockery or outright rejection. I began to realize that this was no fleeting rebellion. This was intentional, a deliberate effort to make me feel worthless, small, invisible. She started taking over the house completely. I had trusted her with keys, with responsibilities, with my faith that she would grow into a responsible adult. Now, she used that trust against me. Bills were left unpaid, my belongings were moved or discarded without a word, and she deliberately spread false stories about me to neighbors and relatives. I felt the sting of humiliation every time I saw the questioning glances, the subtle side eye, the whispers as I passed. It was as if she was orchestrating a performance of my failure, and I was forced to watch. The worst moments were when friends and relatives visited. Emily would charm them with a sweetness I no longer recognized, making me look like an intruder in my own life. She told people I was controlling, unreasonable, a burden. Each lie she spread was a sharp cut, a reminder that my daughter, the person I had sacrificed for, had chosen to betray me for social validation. I tried to defend myself, but my words fell flat, lost amidst her practiced smiles and cutting retorts. The more I resisted, the more audacious she became. One evening, I decided to confront her directly. I went to the house, heart hammering, ready to speak calmly, to appeal to her sense of decency. The moment I entered, I saw at my favorite chair, the one I had used for decades, now thrown into the corner, scratched and dented. My personal papers, carefully organized for years, were scattered across the floor. Emily sat on the sofa, her phone in hand, scrolling lazily, her expression one of utter boredom. "You are pathetic," she said casually, not even looking up. "I do not know why you even bother." I froze. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had raised her, fed her, sheltered her, and this was the gratitude I received. I felt my chest tighten, my vision blur with the weight of betrayal. Every instinct in me screamed to leave, to retreat, but a part of me, the part that refused to be humiliated again, stayed. Over the following weeks, the pattern worsened. She began restricting access to my things, locking doors, hiding personal items, and even taking over my car without permission. Every interaction felt like a test of my patience, a psychological assault designed to break me down. She would whisper threats under her breath, saying I did not deserve respect, that I should accept my place. I began to feel trapped, powerless, constantly on edge, knowing that at any moment, another insult or slight could shatter me further. And yet, in the midst of this torment, something strange happened. The anger inside me, which had simmered quietly at first, began to take shape. I noticed patterns in her behavior, weaknesses in her arrogance, moments when she let her guard down. Every cruel act she performed was a window into her character, a clue I could use to turn the tables. I began to observe, to plan silently, while maintaining the facade of a man beaten by life. I realized that Emily's cruelty was predictable. She relied on shock, on emotion, on the assumption that I would react immediately. That assumption was her greatest mistake. I stopped arguing, stopped defending myself in public, stopped begging for recognition. Instead, I began documenting everything: her lies, her theft, her manipulations. Each entry fueled the fire inside me, and with each cruel word, each dismissive glance, my resolve grew stronger. By the time I left her house soaked and humiliated after another confrontation, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was no longer about reconciliation. It was about justice, about ensuring that the person who had tried to destroy me would feel the weight of her actions. I was done being a victim. Emily had underestimated me, assumed my love would keep me passive. She had no idea what was coming. I sat alone in my small apartment that night, the rain tapping relentlessly against the window, echoing the storm inside me. My body ached, my hands trembled, and my mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and fury. I could no longer pretend that Emily's actions were merely teenage rebellion, that they were mistakes that could be forgiven. No, she had crossed a line. She had humiliated me publicly, stolen from me, and weaponized the very love I had given her to mock me. I was done. Every fiber of my being screamed that I could not remain passive any longer. I clenched my fists so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I could feel my pulse in my temples, in my chest, a rapid drumbeat of anger and determination. I remembered all the nights I had lain awake, worrying about her future, her happiness, and her safety. I remembered every sacrifice, every missed opportunity, every moment I had put her above myself. And now she had discarded me as if I were nothing. I could feel tears of rage and heartbreak building behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I needed clarity, not despair. I began to think with precision. Every incident, every insult, every theft became data, pieces of a puzzle I was determined to solve. She believed she had power over me because I had shown my love openly. That was her mistake. I would not respond with emotion. I would respond with strategy. I would plan, calculate, and execute in a way that she could never anticipate. The fire inside me burned brighter with each recollection of her cruelty. Every mocking laugh, every dismissive comment, every public humiliation became fuel for a plan that would ensure she could never treat me like that again. I remembered her weaknesses, her arrogance, her need for attention, the way she underestimated me at every turn. She believed that my patience was weakness, that my love was a leash. That assumption would be her undoing. I began taking notes, writing down patterns of her behavior, observing when she was most careless, when she let her guard down. I imagined scenarios where her actions could be turned against her, where every cruel word and selfish deed would boomerang in a way that was undeniable, humiliating, and just. At that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would not be broken. I would not beg for respect. I would reclaim my dignity and make Emily understand that betrayal carries consequences. I visualized the end result, her shock, her disbelief, the weight of realization pressing down on her as she faced the outcome of her actions. It was not about vengeance in the sense of cruelty. It was about justice, about setting the scales right, about teaching a lesson that would be impossible to ignore. I spent the entire night awake, sketching out every detail, mentally rehearsing the plan. I imagined how she would react to each step, how her confidence would crumble when the first move hit, how her arrogance would turn to panic. Each scenario made my resolve stronger. I felt a sense of power returning, a shift from victim to strategist. The anger that had threatened to consume me became disciplined, focused, sharpened like a blade. By the first light of dawn, I knew the path forward. This was no longer about negotiating or pleading. This was about turning the tables in a way that was intelligent, methodical, and precise. Emily had thought she controlled the narrative. She had thought she could humiliate me endlessly. She had assumed that her youth, her proximity, and her audacity were advantages. She had underestimated the resolve of a man pushed to his limit, a man who had been dismissed but not destroyed. I stepped outside for a breath of cold morning air, the fog rising from the streets like a curtain hiding the future. I could feel the shift within me, a clarity I had never experienced before. The betrayal had forged a decision that was unwavering. I would act, and when I did, Emily would see the consequences of her actions in a way that was undeniable. I would rise from the humiliation, and she would face the truth that no one, not even her, could break me without repercussions. That was the moment I became resolute. The moment the victim ended and the strategist began. The moment Emily's arrogance planted the seeds of her own reckoning. I would plan, I would wait, I would act. And when the time came, she would realize that the man she thought powerless was capable of outmaneuvering her at every turn. Justice, not chaos, would be my weapon. I moved quietly after that. No dramatic gestures, no visible anger, just patience and precision. I became invisible in the way predators do before they strike. Emily believed I was defeated, broken, emotionally exhausted. That illusion was the first and most important step of my plan. I began by gathering evidence. Every message she sent, every voice note dripping with contempt, every time she admitted to taking my belongings or manipulating the narrative. I recorded dates, times, patterns. I saved screenshots. I archived conversations. I documented witnesses. I became meticulous. This was no longer emotional. This was procedural. The house was still legally mine. That was the detail she had overlooked in her arrogance. I had transferred temporary living control to her out of trust, not ownership. The mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes, everything still carried my name. She had been standing on borrowed ground while believing it was permanent territory. That realization was the spark. I visited my lawyer quietly. No drama, no accusations. Just facts laid out like puzzle pieces. He listened without interruption, nodding slowly as the story unfolded. When I finished, he looked at me and said, "You have more control than you think." Those words settled into my chest like oxygen. We created a timeline. Legal notices, eviction protocol, financial separation, account freezes, property reclamation. Every move would be clean, lawful, and irreversible. No shouting, no confrontation, just consequences. But legal pressure alone was not enough. Emily thrived on public image. She controlled the narrative through charm and manipulation. So I prepared the counter-narrative, not with anger, but with truth. I reached out to family members she had poisoned against me. I showed them evidence. I showed them records. I showed them consistency. One by one, their expressions changed from doubt to disbelief, then to shame. The mask Emily wore began to crack quietly. The next step required patience. I waited until she became comfortable again, until she began posting photos online, showing off the house, claiming independence, presenting herself as the survivor of a cruel parent. I let her build her stage, let her audience grow, let her ego expand. Then I acted. The first letter arrived by certified mail. Legal language, polite tone, absolute authority. Notice of property reassumption, 30 days to vacate. Utilities and financial accounts to be separated within 72 hours. I imagined her opening it. The pause, the confusion, the tightening of her jaw, the first flicker of uncertainty. She called me immediately. I did not answer. The second letter followed. Documentation of evidence regarding property misuse and misrepresentation. Legal consequences stated clearly. No threats, just outcomes. Her calls became frantic. Her messages shifted from mocking to pleading. That transition was my confirmation. The balance of power had begun to tilt. I cut off access to the shared accounts, legally and cleanly. The house utilities transferred into my name alone. Her financial cushion vanished overnight. The illusion of control shattered. When she finally appeared at my apartment, I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not accuse. I stood calm, composed, unmovable. She looked smaller than I remembered, her posture no longer confident, her tone no longer sharp. Fear had replaced arrogance. "You cannot do this," she said. But there was no authority in her voice. "I already have," I replied. The silence between us felt heavier than any scream. She tried manipulation, then guilt, then tears. Each tactic was something I had already anticipated. I did not react. I only stated facts. This is not revenge. This is consequence. Those words landed harder than any insult. She left without another word. The execution was unfolding exactly as planned. Quiet, controlled. I did not need to humiliate her publicly. The collapse of her constructed identity was punishment enough. But the final step was still coming, and when it arrived, it would not be loud. It would be undeniable. The final moment came on a gray morning, the kind of morning where the sky looks heavy, like it is holding its breath. I stood across the street from my own house, hands in my coat pockets, watching as a moving truck pulled up to the curb. The engine rumbled low, steady, indifferent. That sound felt like the drum roll before a verdict. Emily stood on the porch, frozen. Boxers were stacked behind her, uneven and rushed, as if her world had been packed in panic. Her shoulders were stiff, her jaw tight, her eyes darting from the truck to the front door, as if she still believed this was a misunderstanding that could be reversed. For weeks, she had fought, argued, pleaded, and threatened. None of it had worked. The law was not emotional. The law did not care about manipulation. It only cared about truth. I watched as the driver handed her paperwork. She scanned it quickly, then again, slower this time. I saw the moment it sank in. Her lips parted slightly. Her breathing changed. That was the moment when denial collapsed into reality. She looked around, almost as if searching for an audience, someone to rescue her with sympathy. There was no one, just silence and consequence. I stepped forward then, not to taunt her, not to gloat, but to witness the end of what she had created. My footsteps felt steady, grounded, powerful. Each step carried me further away from the man who had once been shoved into the rain, humiliated and powerless. She turned when she heard me. Our eyes met. For the first time in months, she did not look superior. She looked small, exposed. "You planned this," she said quietly. "I prepared for it," I answered. "You caused it." Her face tightened. The words had no room for argument, no emotional leverage, no space for excuses. The movers began carrying boxes out. The front door, the same door that had slammed in my face, now stood open, stripped of authority. The house no longer belonged to her fantasy. It belonged to reality again. I felt something loosen inside my chest, something that had been knotted for months. It was not anger leaving me. It was weight, a deep, exhausting weight that had lived in my bones since the day she told me I belonged in the trash. That weight was finally lifting. She took a step closer, her voice trembling. "Where am I supposed to go?" I held her gaze. "That is the question you should have asked before you treated me like I was disposable." There was no cruelty in my tone, only truth. That made it sharper. She looked away, her eyes glistening, her shoulders sagging, as if the strength had drained from her body. The arrogance was gone. The performance was over. What remained was the raw consequence of her own choices. The truck filled slowly. Each box felt like a chapter closing. Each thud against the metal floor was punctuation. Final, absolute. I did not feel joy in her pain. I felt validation. I felt balance returning. I felt my dignity standing upright again after being bent for too long. When the last box was loaded, the driver closed the door. The metallic slam echoed down the quiet street like a judge's gavel. Emily stood there, motionless. No house, no stage, no audience. Only accountability. She whispered, "You ruined my life." I paused before responding. That pause mattered. It was the space between accusation and truth. "No," I said calmly. "I stopped you from ruining mine." Her breath caught. The words settled slowly, painfully, but they were undeniable. I walked past her and into the house. My house, the familiar smell of old wood and quiet memories greeted me. I stood in the living room, empty now, and let the silence wrap around me. It did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful. For the first time since everything began, I smiled. Not out of spite, not out of victory, but out of relief. I had reclaimed what was mine. My space, my dignity, my power. Outside, the truck pulled away. Emily's chapter in this house ended with the sound of retreating tires, and mine began again with silence, strength, and the knowledge that justice had finally been served. The house was quiet now, but the echoes of the past weeks lingered in my mind. I walked through the empty rooms, each step a reminder of what had been taken and what I had reclaimed. It was strange, standing in the space I had built, the space I had loved, knowing that someone I raised could have caused so much destruction. But destruction is not permanent when it meets patience, strategy, and resolve. Emily had thought she could humiliate me without consequence. She had thought that arrogance, charm, and manipulation could shield her from reality. She was wrong. Karma does not require vengeance in the sense of cruelty. It only requires awareness, preparation, and action. I realized something important in those days of planning, waiting, and executing. Life will sometimes hand you betrayal in its purest, sharpest form. People you trust will use your kindness as a weapon against you. And when that happens, the instinct is often to react with anger, to lash out, or to plead. That instinct, however natural, is fleeting. The true measure of strength lies in turning that betrayal into clarity. I had allowed myself to feel every pang of hurt, every stab of humiliation, and I had transformed it into focus. In doing so, I did not merely reclaim property or enforce justice, I reclaimed myself. Watching Emily leave the house, her confidence stripped away, her arrogance humbled. I understood how powerful consequence can be. She had expected me to break, to beg, to surrender. Instead, I had turned every insult, every manipulation, every act of cruelty into a roadmap for her own reckoning. There was no malice in my actions, only resolution. There was no public spectacle, only undeniable truth. And in that truth, I found satisfaction. This experience taught me that respect is not freely given. it is earned and maintained. And when respect is stripped away, it is not weakness to respond, strategically is strength. I also learned that patience is a form of power. By waiting, observing, and planning, I had transformed a situation that seemed hopeless into one of complete control. I had turned victimhood into agency. I had turned humiliation into validation. There is a lesson in observing human nature in its rawest form. Emily acted out of self-interest, arrogance, and immaturity, assuming the world would protect her from consequences. I acted out of clarity, patience, and purpose, assuming the world would respond only to truth and preparation. Life has a way of balancing itself if you are willing to step back, observe, and act when the moment is right. The universe does not need intervention when justice is carefully executed. It simply rewards awareness, discipline, and resolve. As I settled back into the quiet of my home, I felt a strange sense of calm. Not relief from anger, but the peace that comes from knowing that injustice has been corrected. I did not need Emily to apologize. I did not need her to acknowledge wrongdoing. That was irrelevant. What mattered was that the scales had been balanced, that my dignity had been restored, and that I had proven, first to myself and then to the world, that no one can discard you without consequence. This is not a story of reconciliation. It is not a story of forgiveness. It is a story of awareness, patience, and action. It is a story that proves that even in betrayal, there is opportunity to reclaim your life, your space, your power, and your self-respect. And when that reclamation happens, it is more satisfying than any plea, apology, or negotiation could ever provide. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us your most satisfying revenge story. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more gripping tales of justice, betrayal, and consequences. Watch closely. Sometimes the sweetest victories come in silence, patience, and the power of preparation.